Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining Infinix's weekly office hours. This week, we are going to be tackling patient access and prior authorization challenges. We're pleased to have our VP of Growth and Strategy, David Byrd, here with us. And we're going to focus specifically today on prior auth challenges, but would welcome any questions related to the whole patient access process as well. So, David, I was hoping you could kick us off and give us an overview of just what we're seeing in the market in terms of prior auths and patient access. What are you hearing from existing clients, new clients? I'd like to start there.
Sure. So I think one of the major reasons Infinix is contacted is just due to the overwhelming process of prior authorizations, the manual efforts that go into it, the denials that they're seeing on certain procedures or tests, turnaround times. As of recent, I would say one of the trends is just staffing needs. People can't seem to fill positions or maintain the patient access FTEs for prior authorization. And a lot of that is just due to the tedious nature of trying to obtain an auth, or even before that, verifying insurance down to the procedure or test benefit level. So there's all kinds of different aspects to what we're seeing. I think that the payers continue to, look at the high frequency of procedures and tests, and then implement, utilization management just to try to manage through the cost of healthcare. So we continue to see. I don't want to use the word complaints, but that's what it is, complaints about the prior auth process in general. I don't see the payers relaxing on their guidelines and what they're issuing for prior authorizations. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. That is a true trend line that we've seen over the last three to 5 years, and it continues to go that way.
Okay, thank you. What challenges? I know we talked a little bit about what's going on and what the trends are. Can you be specific on, in terms of process, what challenges are we seeing? Obviously, the staffing issue is a big one. What other process-related challenges are you seeing in terms of prior auth?
So when you look at the prior authorization workflow, in order from A to Z, in order to get that prior authorization, it's extremely manual. Guidelines are updated on a monthly basis. For an employee that's in that role to maintain the knowledge base of each individual payer, of each individual procedure and test that needs a prior authorization, that's a big hump to get over. In addition to that, sitting on the phone, waiting for an agent at the payer to pick up to answer questions, or even going out to the individual portals, is a big suck of time, quite honestly. And from an employee satisfaction standpoint, it can get frustrating. And I think that's why you see the high nature of churn in this position and the challenge to fulfill the role. So write-offs tend to be a really big problem. I mean, given the specialties that we walk into, whether it's radiology, cardiology, orthopedic, sleep, you name it, write-offs are anywhere, write-offs are anywhere from 5 to 15%. We've seen it as high as 30%, especially when you're looking at molecular type of test. So from a granular process, it's just the whole workflow. I mean, just going out to portals, answering the clinical pathway questions that they have on those portals, which they change often. Like I said before, sitting on the phone, trying to get an agent from the payer. And then once you do get the agent on the phone, you can only address a certain number of procedures or tests. You have to hang up and you have to call back again to get the additional procedures that or tests that are required to get a prior authorization. So it's an overwhelming process. I think, if the audience has read anything on prior auth and the cost, it's one of the highest costs on the patient access side for getting delivery of care. And when you think about that from a patient satisfaction standpoint, it impacts the patient. We have a really good partner that's in ophthalmology, PX Technology, and they specialize in retina shots. And these shots are required, and there's certain times where the patients absolutely need that shot, or there's a chance that they could go blind. I mean, it's very serious. It's similar to oncology and the treatment that those patients needs. If the patients can't get the care that they need, that is reflected on the provider that's trying to get that prior authorization. We see it in radiology as well. Patient abandonment is a big issue, where a radiology imaging center is trying to get a prior auth for a high modality procedure and it's taking too long. So the patient goes to a different imaging center that can get the prior authorization quickly. So not only does that impact patient satisfaction, you can imagine what it does to the staff, but it also impacts the reimbursement of the facilities and the providers when a patient abandons that treatment. And then if they don't get the care that's needed, then you're impacting, the patient's health. So it's not just from an aspect of touching elements of the workflow, but it's the whole gamut. It's patient satisfaction. It's your employee satisfaction. It's the reimbursement that is duly given to the provider that's trying to get that procedure. So it's a high impact activity, and if you don't have a solution for it, it's going to impact different touch points along the way.
Great, thanks. The current process, we talked a little bit about manual. A lot of folks are also doing prior auths out of their EMR, out of their billing system, their practice management system. Can you talk a little bit about how those processes and where that disconnect is between processes and what is reality in the world of prior auths now?
Yeah, I think there's certain systems like you just mentioned that are trying to help with the workflow. But unfortunately, and they do to an extent, right? It's in a system, they have work queues, they have some type of workflow established. The challenge is it's all human-based, right? And unfortunately, as we all know, we're not perfect. And so human error comes into the aspect, people get sick, people get frustrated. And so even though you have a module that assists in at least organizing the prior authorization start, it doesn't really correct or allow for a streamlined workflow that software does, especially when you introduce technologies like artificial intelligence or machine learning or RPA, robotic process automation, or natural language processing, NLP. There's certain things that technologies do better than humans, they need human assistance, especially in the prior authorization workflow. But just organizing a work list for prior authorization is really putting the onus back on that prior authorization specialist, really giving them the real tools that could assist in those manual processes. I mean, again, calling different payers or going out to different portals, trying to answer the questions, keeping up on medical necessity and the rules around the specific payers, that's a lot of knowledge for one individual to handle. And then you have the payers who change the rules on you or change the questions within the portals. So the manual process without assistance, even if it's in a EMR, EHR, practice management system, it is still frustrating. It's still a lot of work without any assistance from automation.
That's a good point. Even though those are through a piece of technology, it's still a manual process. So in terms of best practices for prior auth, as we close out 2021 and enter into 2022, given what you've talked about, we're seeing in the market, given the challenges, the folks that are doing prior auth really well, what are they doing?
So I think, with any industry, the leaders within an industry are always looking how to automate. How do we streamline internal processes? And the same thing's happening within prior authorization. And it's because it's becoming such a headache. So now you're seeing the introduction of different type of technologies that have been around for a while, but are being applied to prior authorization. For example, at Infinx, we leverage all of our products, for that matter, on the foundation of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then any other tools that we can leverage to automate certain processes, with the acknowledgement that, especially in prior auth, you're not going to be able to automate 100% of the process. You're going to have some type of human involvement to keep that process going. So the thought leaders within the healthcare community, those practices that are really looking at, how do we maintain our revenue when revenue is being compressed in just about every single specialty? What are the tools out there that we can implement that will streamline it and help us get to, our overall goals? And when it comes to prior auth, I'll give the example of the 4 steps that our customers get to use through our technology. And the first one is determination. And what that means is that we apply machine learning, artificial intelligence to assist our customers in identifying if a prior authorization is required or not. And what it does is it looks at that procedure, that payer, the procedure down to the benefit level and the payer, and it can determine whether prior authorization is required or not for that specific payer. Once it's identified that is required, the next step is initiation. And initiation isn't just submitting the prior authorization, it's identifying the criteria by that benefit manager or that payer that's required to submit the information. So again, if you break this down just into the 2 processes and you go back to that manual process, think about the involvement that the human has to do just to determine if that prior authorization is required. Then they also have to understand what's the criteria around how we submit this prior auth. So we do that literally in seconds. And then the third step is verification. And all verification means is that we've identified that payer benefit manager has received the prior auth, that it's on file, and it's being processed. So our customers through the integration with their system, or if they're using our portal, can quickly identify, okay, the payer has received it, they're processing it, and then the last step is follow-up. And what I like to say follow-up is it's really an alerting mechanism. It alerts our customers of where the status is of that prior authorization, whether it's been approved, whether there's some criteria that the payer has come back and said, you know what, we need additional information. We appreciate that you sent the clinicals with us or to us, but we need more information on the history of this patient. Why is this really being ordered? So we can get additional clarification. And that's where our human specialist, if the AI can't handle that, will jump in, reach out to that payer, supply that payer with the additional clinical information that they need so the auth can get approved. So again, we see the cutting edge practices, those facilities or providers that are really looking to impact their operations. And at the end of the day, how do they receive the reimbursement that they deserve? So that's what I'd say we're seeing in the market from a whole across specialties and facilities.
Great. We had one last question that came in. A lot of providers have a gut feeling, an inkling that they've got a prior auth problem. Any suggestions on what KPIs, what metrics, what they can look at to start to narrow down and say, I need some help?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I can tell you on the sales side of when we walk in and engage with a prospect, you know, the number one question we ask is, how many prior authorizations are you doing a month? And I think people would be surprised how many facilities don't have an answer to that question. And that tells me that they don't really understand the problem. They know they have a problem, and it's usually because of the write-offs, which, you know, once you implement a technology, that you're going to see that impact in a positive way. But the technologies can help it, but it's really getting down to looking at, okay, what's your turnaround time to get an authorization? What are your write-offs? What are your denials? What is your patient abandonment? And patient abandonment goes to certain types of specialties, especially radiology. You know, the oncology market, the cardiology market, obviously they don't see patient abandonment so much. So it really depends on the type of specialty you're in, but there's different KPIs, there's different benchmarks that we can share with individuals that engage with us. But the main thing is really turnaround times and write-offs. That's what we see. Denials relate to write-offs essentially. But that's what we see, and there's different, like for example, in radiology, you should not have denials over 1%. You just shouldn't when it comes to prior auth. And I'm not talking on the claim denial side, I'm talking on the prior authorization side. Whereas in lab, you know, depending on the type of lab we see, it can be anywhere from 15 to 30% write-offs or denials. So there's different benchmarks that we share with the prospects by specialty, and it really does depend by specialty what the KPIs are within those markets.
Well, David, thanks so much for your time today. This was really beneficial. For those of you that have attended, if, as David mentioned, you suspect you might have a prior auth problem, let us know. We'd be happy to help you and just discuss what you're going through and make some recommendations on in terms of technology and process. So thanks again for joining, and we will hopefully see you back here next Thursday at the same time. Thanks. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thank you.